Welcome to Trauma and Transcendence, where healing meets awakening. I'm Amanda M. Dodd, your guide on this transformative journey. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Let's transcend together. Hello, Soulful Seeker. Welcome back to Trauma and Transcendence. And this is going to be an interesting episode. I'm actually really excited about this episode. Today, what I'd like to explore is spiritual healing crisis. And we'll get into healing crisis and what it is outside of the spiritual, because as it is, I've been having some exchanges with that, especially this past year. And it's also really helpful and just nice to know. So it's interesting to see it on the holistic side with the body and what can happen there, and then also in the spiritual end. But today, we're going to be mostly in the spiritual end of it. As you are hearing this, I will be in the Salt Cave at a Creative Apothecare, and I'm doing a different meditation. This time it's forwarding grace. And I have no doubt that I will be enjoying that. And forwarding grace to me is helping others to build up some spiritual energy and to build what Carolyn Myss talks about as the grace bank account, so that there's a reserve there rather than being in the red. And when you need it, then you can recall on that energy, make a withdrawal from your grace bank account. So um, that's fun and something new. And that's what I'll be doing as you're able to have this episode. I record these ahead of time because Thursdays are always just a very busy day for me. But it is wonderful to be here with you this week. What else is happening? On Friday, there is a Raising Your Vibration and Spiritual Protection class over Google Meets. That is available in the Mediumship Development group if you're interested. You can also find it on the website, where I'm going to be going in depth about vibration, energy, raising vibration, and a lot of different methods of spiritual protection. And as I'm looking forward to exploring that, I came up with today's podcast idea, because one of the very few things that most spiritual teachers and practitioners will tell you, maybe a lot of them don't have awareness of this, but is that healing crisis can happen. Now, let's go over it first with the physical. So, with the physical, and I'm probably going to butcher this word, um, healing crisis essentially is known as Herxheimer reaction. It's a temporary worsening of the symptoms that occurs when the body is going through the process of healing. Now, a lot of times that can look like a setback. An example of this is when I did a 72-hour fast. And before that, I had done a 40-hour fast. And both of those fasts, after completing the amount of time that I wanted to complete and felt like I was hitting my proper limits and everything, I broke out in a horrid rash that lasted both times over 3 weeks. It was awful. It was everywhere. It was supremely itchy. At one point during the 72-hour fast, I actually started to break out in the rash while still fasting. And so there was this question of, well, crap, do I stop here or do I keep going? And I was able to keep going that time because I understood what was happening. And essentially, as the body starts to heal, it starts to resolve things, it can recirculate bacteria, things that were stored in the fat, various toxins, heavy metals, and things like that. And then as you are burning that down while fasting, those things then recirculate back through the body. Now, the other part of this is that when we have a huge amount of healing come in, everything that was hidden essentially has to come into the light, is how I look at that. So we do that on a very physical level. And that's how we refer to that, was that really difficult word, Herxheimer reaction. So it's important to know that as you're doing healing of the holistic kind, that it may look like things are getting worse sometimes. But in reality, that's not always the case. And sometimes that's actually a good sign that you are making progress, that you are healing. So the first time I had that happen with the 40-hour fast, I panicked and I was miserable. And in that time, I want to say, like, I didn't anticipate it. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if it was like an autoimmune response I was having, because it also came with a lot of joint pain and inflammation, and I felt just all around miserable. As that was winding down, I was at HypnoThoughts last year, which is the biggest conference in the world for hypnosis. And I was just still covered in the rash and miserable. Like, it was just so rough to be doing something and not feeling so well. So I'm definitely going to plan things better this time. So with the physical, there are things that we can do. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I'm not really a holistic doctor or a holistic health and wealth practitioner in that way. It's just not what I'm credentialed for necessarily. So with hypnosis, yes, I can do medical hypnosis, but that's rather different. But what I learned was, if you're doing long fasts like that, you have to take a binder. You have to forgive me if you hear dogs snoring and settling into their beds. It's late, and everybody just wants to be where I am. Um, so with the binder, essentially what that does is it will absorb and hold on to any of the bacteria die off that's happening, any toxins of the heavy metals and things that you're releasing from your body, you're detoxing. It'll absorb it and then help it move through the system. And it can be tricky to get the right amount and one that's really actually very effective, because what I learned was they aren't all. And then also to replace good bacteria and to feed it well. So that's what it looks like in the physical. But today I want to talk about spiritual healing hypnosis, or crisis rather. Um, so, how do we know when someone is having a spiritual healing crisis? And you might notice this from things you've experienced and maybe just didn't know that there was a term for it, or you've witnessed other people do, particularly if you've been in the spiritual realms and just enjoying various things. If you become a Reiki practitioner or had a Reiki session, you had a very strong response to it. Very likely that might have been what you were experiencing. So, first things first, what does it look like to have spiritual healing crisis? And it can look a few different ways, and it's not going to be the same every time, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. But some of the effects can be cold and flu, can be exhaustion, it could be feeling hot, sweating, it can be nausea, discomfort. The feelings of panic may arise, more anxiety, emotional dysregulation. It could also be having a healing session, and then the next day you feel like you have the blues, you feel down, but there's no real reason for it. It could be feeling a little bit more irritable that next day, having a not so great sleep, very vivid dreams. It's a lot of big life changes. So oftentimes when we see a practitioner becoming a Reiki master, that's when I've seen this the most. I don't feel like I've seen this particularly when it comes to practicing hypnosis, even though a lot of it can be very high vibration. I just don't see it happening very much, and I feel like that's because I always work at the pace of your psyche. I always work at the edges in a way that's comfortable and not too fast that it's gonna be a huge vibrational shift for you. But, sometimes when people go through those trainings, they get those attunements, and then all of a sudden you see their life looking like it's going to crap, and it's not necessarily. It's the things that no longer fit or weren't working, but they were possibly avoiding now coming to be addressed. In some ways, it's almost like the things in the subconscious, the shadow, now becoming conscious to say, okay, great, you wanted to heal. Here I am. How do you want to be with this? What do you want to do with this? So it can look like big life changes, people changing their marriage, changing their job, having relationships drop off, starting new relationships and friendships, habits and hobbies changing. It's not uncommon for people to give up things that had a hold on them, change their eating style, the way that they live, and their overall energy, their appearance, the way that they then go out in the world and communicate and speak. So that can be a lot and very interesting. There can be some cognitive dissonance, which means they're not sure what they feel in terms of something. They might have two different ideas competing in the mind, and that dissonance is not knowing which way is true. What's up, what's down? There's that moment of confusion. Also, I would say seeing truth in situations. When I think back to spiritual healing crisis for me, I did have that cognitive dissonance of there was this story that I was telling myself about relationships and situations, and who I was out in the world, versus maybe what reality was. And that was uncomfortable and that was hard, but it was an incredible invitation to say, okay, this is what it's been so far. How's that working for you? Do you still want to do this? Or are you ready for a different approach, something a little better that might want to come through? And oftentimes that is what it is. Oh, this one definitely happened to me. Dark Night of the Soul, or what one of my favorite spiritual teachers is Robert Ohotto. He often coined it as Dark Night of the Ego, because it's the ego that is the one that's dying off and suffering. I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dark Night of the Soul or Dark Night of the Ego, and that would be an exceptional episode to look at going forward. So actually, I'll write that down just to give myself a reminder. And then we can explore that too, but essentially, the short of it is living in ways that are incongruent with who you are, and there comes to be a reckoning. The things that you've relied on are then falling apart, and you're having to do something different. And when there is that resistance, sometimes the more you hold on, the more it hurts. And maybe the solution is to surrender, to accept, and to let go. So that's the short of it, and that was what worked for me every time I was in the dark night of the ego. So there's always that question of what was I holding on to? Was that serving me? And what would be a higher vibrational option? And let's see, feeling in victim. Like, why are all these things happening to me? Why is, everything lining up in this way? Because it can feel very personal. And it is very personal. So, of course, it's going to feel that way. But I think the main thing to remember is when you're going through this is everything is happening for you rather than to you. So with every situation or shift, the question is always, if this was here to teach me a lesson, What am I learning? What does it want me to know? And so that actually is one of the ways to work through it, and I'll get to those in a little bit as well. So, why does healing crisis happen? For me, I really feel like it's a vibrational shift. I am bringing this up now because I've got that class on Friday. And as students come through and they start to raise their vibration, some of them may or may not trigger this. And I want them to be ready. I want them to be prepared to have tools and to know that if this happens, to reach out for support. And I thought, well, what a great opportunity for trauma and transcendence because you're going to be going through this too. You're going to be healing at different levels. This pug is something else. You can't see it, but she's curled up in the closet in the beanbag chair. We bought that purposely for the dogs, and she's in there snoring now. Hopefully you can't hear her. Unreal. So as we heal, and this can come about in a lot of different ways. So you'd already heard me mention that one of the possible triggers could be a Reiki session. It could be a Reiki attunement. It could be seeking Reiki mastery. Why would that cause that shift? Why would this cause this to happen? And it's because Reiki is a very high vibrational energy. Now, if you have a system that isn't adapted to high vibrational energy, if you eat a standard American diet, to include all the other things we consume in society, like TV, news, movies that are lower vibrational content, music that's lower vibrational content, and then all of a sudden you shift your energy to live entirely differently. And now you're inviting this foreign, high vibrational energy in. Your body doesn't know how to manage and how to deal with that. And so that high vibrational energy comes in. And even though Reiki is very gentle and is wonderful for people of all ages, it can stir the pot and bring up those things that were lower vibrational energy that are no longer going to fit. And so there's a moment where then your body, your energy is shifting. And it's like, well, I'm not the vibration I used to be, but I'm not fully the highest vibration I could be. So there's a moment of time when all of your energy is shifting, it's adapting, it's transforming and changing. And so there will be some days that feel better than others. And that's because you're just upgrading to a newer vibration. And things within your life will just not fit that. It's not uncommon for people to drop off on big habits or to make new habits. Maybe instead of having, a reach for the cigarette, instead you choose to go do a yoga class and work through stress that way. Those kinds of changes are what can begin to happen. So other triggers that can bring that about, working in the Akashic Records, that can happen. The Akashic Records are very high vibration. Now, with the records, depending on the practitioner or the person accessing, there are different access points. Some are lower in vibration and some are higher in vibration. And it mainly depends on how you deal with your channel, how you take care of yourself as a conduit. But working within the records, and that can include giving yourself a reading, giving someone else a reading, going in there for healing work, you're accessing that high vibrational energy again. Other things, awakening. Awakening can trigger this process, and that's why spiritual awakening can often feel so abrupt and jarring for so many people. It's a vibrational, energetic change, and then your energy has to reconstitute itself in a way that's going to be congruent. And that can take a moment because then you're shifting. Perhaps your tastes in food The things that you use to nourish in your body and on your body then begin to change. I know that after I did my Reiki attunements, I did shift my way of eating some. I did aim for a little bit healthier, at least less takeout, at least less fast food. For a little while, and in the time, I actually tried to go vegan altogether, and that's a whole other story. That just my body didn't work that way for me. Um, so there was that. I had also, oh goodness, I started spending a lot more time really valuing my energy and starting to assess my boundaries. I feel that I learned to stop reacting to so many things, and I began to start responding, which I feel is much higher vibration and shows a lot more self-control and emotional regulation. Working with Kundalini energy. Mhm. Any kind of, maybe not, yeah, I mean, if it's a potent enough session, any kind of theta, any kind of quantum healing, anywhere where you are being exposed to high vibrational energy and you're integrating it in, could potentially be a trigger for this. Yoga. Oh my God. So I'm going to tell this story one day. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I began to practice yoga relatively young. I want to say I was around 16, and it became a weekly practice for me. And at some point during that, I had experienced a full Kundalini awakening at a pretty young, complicated age. Um, and definitely there was a spiritual healing crisis. I just didn't identify it. I didn't have a label. I didn't know it was a thing. I just thought I was losing my mind, essentially. And that is what many people will feel like, of why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? And it can lead them to then question the healthy healing modality or change that they brought in. And I don't want you to be disheartened by that. I don't want you to think, oh, this thing is not good for me, just because you might be having some of these things come up. Because what it is a validation of, hey, you're making wonderful healing shifts. Let's process this out for you, of your energy, of your being, of your emotion, all of your spiritual and astral bodies. A higher vibrational life, which is why I'm doing this episode today, so that when those students who take that class go through it and learn and start implementing things, if they experience some of this, they'll have this episode to hear and say, oh, wait, I know how to adjust and work with this now in a more helpful way. Another one, I don't know if they talk about this enough. When people go on retreat, oftentimes, if you're going somewhere and there's going to be a big shift in your habits, in your hobbies, in your nourishment, in your physical activity, in the way that you're relating and just being with other people, that could be a very big trigger. Can you imagine? I'm sure this has happened to plenty of people. I don't tend to go on a whole lot of retreats. So I don't know that I can identify an experience with that one personally, but I could see that happening easily, where people go and they're eating higher vibrational food that has, strong life force to it. They're doing more physical activity. Maybe there are times of contemplation and meditation built in. And then when they do connect with other people, and then it's a more boundaried, accepting, higher vibrational way of speaking to each other and relating. And then they go home and it's chaos. They want to take all of these new habits and wonderful things they've discovered into a lower vibrational container, and that's a hard adjustment. So first there's that, adjusting to being at the retreat, and then there's the transition home. Oh my god. So I'm not surprised if a lot of people go through spiritual awakening in that container and then have spiritual healing crisis happen and don't know what to do with it. And so what that could look like is people going on retreat, coming home, and then having a very dark night of the ego happen, dark night of the soul, possibly going into depression and not knowing how to do or be with life, being very disillusioned with the life they had before and struggling to find how it fits now and their place within it. So those are things to be aware of. I'm sure there are other triggers as well, but it's anything that is going to shift your energy in a higher vibrational way. Okay. So hopefully I'm explaining that clearly enough that you're going to be able to understand and have some coordinates for yourself. Some of the other symptoms that can happen are headaches, digestive upset, like I mentioned, the skin rash that I had for forever, heightened emotions, mood swings, mental fog. Let me go down here to my notes and double check because I have notes for both the physical and spiritual. So with spiritual healing crisis is a phase of intense transformation and purification that occurs when we deepen our spiritual practice and evolve on our spiritual path, shifting perspectives. Rather than viewing challenges as setbacks, we recognize them as opportunities for growth and spiritual awakening. And then to add to some of the signs and symptoms, spiritual upheaval, so feelings of confusion, existential questioning, a sense of disconnection may arise as we undergo spiritual upheaval because, again, things have changed. Your way that you show up has changed, and so it's going to ripple out into things like your relationships, the way that you perform your tasks based on whatever your vocation is. If you've changed, everything around you is then also going to reflect that. And not everyone around you will be thrilled about that. Some people will be made a little insecure by it, and they'll want to know that there's still room for them in your life, right? So that could be triggering for other people as well. Energetic shifts, heightened sensitivity, vivid dreams, encounters with synchronicities signify the activation of our spiritual senses and the unfolding of higher consciousness. Now, that I definitely experienced. And then this is more Reiki specific, and I think I'd like to touch on this a different day. But right in between my Usui mastery and heading into Karuna mastery, I experienced some really difficult things. And I want to say a few of them were actually spiritual attacks. One of them was actually not a spiritual attack. It was my first encounter with an ET that I was aware of. And I didn't have a belief in ETs before. So, talk about cognitive dissonance. I had to start readjusting what are my beliefs? Is that something that exists in my world? And I needed help with that. I had to find a good reader. I was lucky to have a really dear friend who was psychic. And as I was explaining to her what had happened, she's able to clairvoyantly pick it up and to also sense it as well with her kind of clear empathy that happened, her clairsentience. And so when I asked her about it, I'm like, what is this? Essentially, what I saw was like this little orb of light, and it had very high vibrational energy, but it was very playful, very curious energy. It felt familiar, but it definitely wasn't something that I'd encountered in this life before. And so it would often happen as I was either sleeping in the middle of the night or about to fall asleep, where I would see this light, I would feel its energy, and then I would kind of panic a little, like freeze up. I'm just like, oh my God, what is this and what do you want? And that happened for a few days in a row. Um, and then it just stopped altogether. But it was right during that phase of having multiple attunements of Reiki. And I don't know that I really got a clear enough expectation or explanation that that could happen. So that might be a whole other thing for us to explore a different day. So between psychic attacks with dark force energy type things, and then the ET situation, it was like, oh my goodness, what is happening? What have I done? Is this a good thing that I've gone on this Reiki spiritual quest and opened up to spirituality when now all of these weird, crazy making things seem to be happening? And there's not a lot of discussion about it at that time. Um, so you have to know that when I did this, most of my attunements in Reiki and practice all started around 2011. So I was aware of Reiki from the time that I was 16, but I didn't actually pursue it until I was about 28. And that's when everything shifted. I call Reiki the great door opener. One, because doing it enhanced all of my abilities, my mediumship, my clairsentience, my clairvoyance, my clairaudience, everything just opened up so wide after that. And that was kind of like the gateway modality for me. And I rippled out into lots of healing modalities after that. So Reiki is a very fond and special place for me, but I don't think anyone really sat me down and said, hey, as you begin this journey, just so you know, here's some of the things that could happen. And here's how you counter it. Here's how you learn to be with it. I wish someone had. So that's why I'm sharing what I do know and have for you here today to the best of my capacity. So, why does this happen? We've had this triggering experience in that way, and it was probably a positive thing that we were triggered by. And then we have these weird set of symptoms and confusion, the whole existential dread, not understanding. There can be a lot of deep self-inquiry that starts to happen. We start questioning everything in our lives and not understanding. What is it all for? Is it for nothing? No, I believe that everything happens for a reason, as cliche or as corny as people think that sounds. I really do believe there's always a deeper reason. And I also believe that it's always towards our benefit as well. With all of the things that I was called to look at during those various times, there were always things that I highly benefited from letting go of. So for me, I view it as an opportunity to level up, to make higher vibrational life choices, to vibrate higher as well. And, one of the reasons we want to vibrate higher is because, yes, we raise our consciousness, but we also raise that of the consciousness of everyone around us. They benefit too. So the planet, society, our communities that we go and join, our relationships. My spouse is not a spiritual person, or at least he definitely wasn't when I met him. Through life with me, he's definitely opened up to a lot of things. And occasionally I hear my words come out of his mouth that are a lot higher vibrational than he ever would have been before. And that's always a little entertaining. And I don't know that he had intended to take it on, but kind of like through osmosis, it happens, right? So the higher you vibrate, the more that you can uplift and be a conduit for light for the communities and the people around you. It'll give you a greater capacity to channel and hold grace, which is a powerful, wonderful thing. Something to ask is, what gift is universe trying to deliver to you? For me, I became aware of doing too much. I was just doing too much. I was trying too hard. I was always trying to live in a place of perfection. It was incredibly painful. And so every time I would engage in perfectionism, there it would be in my face. I would be exhausted, and it would have to come to a point where it's like, you know what? I can't take on this much and function. Like, it literally wasn't working, and I didn't have an option. I had to learn to give it up. I had to learn to navigate that and to release it ultimately. So it was coming up for my benefit. I really feel like universe and source were wanting me to look at it and say, hey, you're doing this thing. It's incredibly painful. You've been holding on for far too long, and holding on is starting to hurt more than letting go. Would you like to see what letting go could look and feel like? And because it's unknown, of course, there might be that moment of fear. But then again, if we're not willing to do things we've never done, we'll never have opportunities and results we've never had. So I learned to be more accepting of myself, more accepting of others, but also to communicate, to step outside myself and to let go of perfectionism, to heal it from its roots. And that was just one of the gifts that came from having spiritual healing crisis for me. The other thing is awakening to our abilities. Oh my goodness. So a lot of people become more sensitive to things overall. And that could be within your diet, that could be within your personal hygiene, that could be with your energetic hygiene, your psychic hygiene, the way that you treat care for your body and the environment can now be very different, and you can have a more heightened experience. I know that a lot of people who've gone through this can't do things like head into a store and go down the laundry aisle because they've become sensitive to so many smells. They may actually end up getting a headache. Or they become aware of food intolerances. I think that's actually why my diet got cleaner, was because then all of a sudden I was aware of having a lot of intolerances of, oh, my body's just not going to accept this now. Just a no. And actually at that time, because it wasn't long after, it was about 2013, maybe the late end of like 2012, where I was like, oh, I want to try to go vegan. And I started incorporating a lot more vegetables into my family's meals. And it actually came down to, I'm no longer going to wear perfume. I'm not going to wear any commercial deodorant. I'm not going to use any product ever made by companies that use harsh chemicals and things like that, or do animal testing. I changed everything. Started using essential oils for a lot of things, and stopped buying so many commercial products because they just didn't feel good. They didn't work for me. My body reacted to them. I didn't want that in my life. So that was a really big change. That one took a lot more time. But that's an example of what can happen and what can come out. And I feel like at that time I went to a place of almost extreme. Like the pendulum was so far left that it overcorrected too far right. And then I had to find somewhere a little more in the middle of, okay, you know what? I can not have everything be super green and super clean all the time, and I'll survive. So not being perfectionist with it essentially is what happened, I think. So it was a very interesting time, and that's another idea of how that could come about. I wonder now if, as you're hearing this, if you're starting to pinpoint some times of potential spiritual healing crisis within your own life, where you grew You healed, you changed, you had some integration or awakening happen that then shifted you vibrationally, energetically, emotionally, mentally, physically. It's all of it creates your vibration. And so it's just that increase where you almost create like a new set point. And then the people, the places, the things that no longer fit either tend to grow with you if you're fortunate, if they're able, if it's in alignment for them, or they drop off. And that can be painful, but sometimes it's kinder in the long run. So I hope that gives you some insight and a little bit of understanding around that. So how do we deal with this? What do we do with this? My personal experience has been one of my favorite topics, and this could be something else we discuss even more deeply on a different day, is surrender. So surrender, and I know so many people dislike even just the word of surrender, like they're capitulating something. And that's not what it is. Surrender for me is literally at one point it was a come to Jesus type moment on my knees of I can't carry this anymore and I don't see a way through. And I'm so exhausted and I'm burning myself out. Please show me. Send me where you want me. I will do whatever you want. Just take me out of this pit of despair. And I didn't say that lightly, and I meant every word of it. And so when I say practice surrender, it is a surrendering of my ego's will to know that there is a bigger picture and I'm meant to play a different part and to have some willingness, some openness, some curiosity about what other role, what other functions I might have or play. And you don't have to have a specific belief. I think at the time I might have prayed to universe, to source. For me, that's a vibrational energy. It doesn't have to look that way. It can have whatever face, whatever beliefs you have. But the act of surrender is immensely powerful. And the minute that I did that, within 24 hours, life changed drastically. And since then, I've gone back to surrender many, many times. So surrender can be a place of sanctuary and of deep vulnerability of, oh my God, the pain of this is so much that I can't move forward. I can't move backward. I'm literally stuck in a box. Get me out of here and I will fulfill whatever function or purpose I'm meant to in the capacity that I'm being called to. It's pretty deep. I would love to explore that in depth more because I had some pretty powerful moments with that for sure. And within that, you heard me say a couple of things. You heard me talk about openness. You heard me talk about curiosity. And it's really finding like that acceptance of, no, I don't need things to be the way that I want them to be. Yes, I have a preference and I will survive if this doesn't work out in the way that I would prefer. And I will show up to the occasion and the opportunities and see what life wants to teach me, to see what life wants to show me is available as an upgrade because we don't have that perspective. I was talking to someone the other day and I literally said, yeah, we have the cheap seats. We don't get to see everything and to understand it all. We will eventually, but not right in this moment. Right in this moment, we're in the cheap seats and we can only see what is in our peripheral and what's ahead of us. We don't get to see everything. And so with that, that leads perfectly into the next one, which is trusting. trusting in something bigger than yourself, whether that's purpose, whether that's source, whatever you want to call it, trusting that there is a reason and that it is for a higher calling, that there is going to be a benefit, that you are being encouraged to explore things that you maybe wouldn't have had the courage or thought to prior. I know that trusting has brought me some really interesting places that I never would have imagined I'd be. So I'd like to offer you that as well. Self care on all levels, coming back to the emotions being embodied physically within your body, making sure that you're nourishing yourself well, that you're doing things that are in accordance and congruent with who you want and need to be, to do the things you want to do and to feel the things you want to feel. So, when in doubt, just go into self care, spend some time in reflection, really observing and paying attention to, does this make sense? What fits, what doesn't fit? And being brave enough to honestly look at it without judgment, without shame, without guilt, and just explore and see what's there, what wants to unfold. Some of the best gifts come in crappy packaging, if you will, dark boxes. I want to say there was a Rumi quote about that. Of I didn't understand that this gift too came from a dark box or something like that. I really love that quote, even though I just butchered it, because sometimes great gifts do come in packaging that doesn't look like a gift. But it is always an opportunity for something bigger and better and to evolve and to grow in a way that maybe we wouldn't have thought was possible. So if you can be in reflection and start to be objective in a non-attached kind of way, a lot can happen. And then you don't have to go into the dark night of the ego. Instead, you can just keep readily adjusting and shifting to what you're being called to in the moment. And that's such a freeing, beautiful place to be. Very high vibration. I wish that for everybody. I wish that for me more often than not, because it's hard to maintain sometimes. I'm still on that path where there are ups and downs with it. It's a practice. It's not a science. It's definitely more of an art form, but it has so many really big rewards. So very much worth it. Meditation and prayer are some other ways to be with this. I think one thing that I really could have done differently as I was experiencing it myself was being vulnerable, opening up and letting others know, hey, since doing these things, I've been experiencing this, that, and the other. Have you been through this? And then maybe getting some insight on what helped them to navigate it. And then maybe slowing down. I don't feel like I did that enough. I did do a lot of reflection. I did spend time in contemplation, but I also was very attached and not objective to navigating or doing things. I very much had my preference in the way that I knew that I did things and I was going to adhere to it. And because I did, holding on was harder than letting go. And, universe is on the other end of that rope. You're going to lose eventually. So you may as well make it an act of surrender and say, oh, what is the gift in this? So reframing. I don't think I don't know that I knew enough about reframing at that point, but that would be another way to navigate this. One thing I will say that I hadn't put into words is you're not alone. Find your other people who have been through this, who will understand this, who can be a support. So that if you're having a hard time maintaining that high vibration and shifting to your new set point, that you've got someone you can at least speak honestly with, who can be in a place of non-judgment and just pure empathy and care. Because it can be moments of suffering, and it doesn't have to be, right? Especially if you've got the right support, you've got the right help. Especially when it comes to Dark Night of the Ego, you don't have to stay there. People stay there for years and years, and they're missing out on so much. They're missing out on connection and life. It could be so isolating and so defeating. It doesn't have to be. You're not alone. You're not the first person to go through it. You won't be the last. And you may go through this very many times within life. So if we learn to be objective, be open, be curious, accepting and trusting, we can go through this so much faster and smoother and more gently and in a way that's more supported. So I hope this has brought you a lot of insight and some validation for yourself. If you enjoyed this, please share it. Let other people know. I would love there to be more conversations about spiritual healing crisis. I needed this over 10 years ago. And someone had told me, one of my Reiki teachers did tell me about healing crisis. She didn't say spiritual, she said healing crisis. But we didn't hash it out to the extent that I've covered here for you today in this last almost hour. And I wish that someone had, so that I could have been more prepared. I could have gone through it so much more gracefully. So that is what I wish for you, that you're able to navigate this so much more gracefully, especially than I did. It's one of those things that I constantly tell students, do as I say, not as I do. Because so many of my lessons have been the hard way. That's kind of an Amanda special right there. I seem to do that so often, and it's just not even necessary. It's incredibly harsh. But while we are here, let's see what I've got coming up. So as I said, as you're hearing this, I will be in the Salt Cave, and I'm going to be exploring Forwarding Grace. It's a hypnotic meditation. I do those every single week at the Apothecary, sometimes 2 a week, depending on what's going on. The following one on February 22nd is going to be Ho'oponopono. If you know that modality, then you know how profound and helpful it is. And actually, Ho'oponopono would be a wonderful way to deal with spiritual healing crisis as well. But when I do this, it's a 90-minute Salt Cave hypnotherapeutic group meditation. And you don't have to know how to practice. You don't have to have that understanding. I will create a sacred container and guide you through. And it can be profoundly healing because I give you lots of opportunities to explore any of those things in the subconscious, any of those things in the shadow, any of those things where your ego is battling and entrenched, to come up, to be explored, to be held, and to be processed in a way that's so gentle, is one of my favorite things to do. I'm really greatly looking forward to that. Following, well, we've got some great interviews coming. I have 3 wonderful people lined up for us here, and we'll see which episode comes out first. I'm actually doing episodes with them on the same day, and we'll see who gets picked for what week. But until then, just keep watching the Facebook page to see what's happening. If you've got questions or things you want to explore, shoot me an email at amanda@healingbeyondtrauma.com, and I'll be happy to dig into it and explore it and share my perspective. And if I don't know, I will find the right person who does to come and to teach us some things on this podcast. But for now, I wish you very bright blessings and so much peace, and to know that wherever you are on your spiritual awakening, your journey coming through trauma and having transcendence, that you're not alone. There's many, many supports out there, to include me. So hopefully you can bring yourself to a space to accept and allow that in your life. All right. Thank you for your time and your attention. Bright blessings. Bye. Thank you for joining us on this transformative episode of Trauma and Transcendence. Your stories matter. I would love to hear them and from you. Connect on our website, healingbeyondtrauma.com, or drop me an email at amanda@healingbeyondtrauma.com. Remember, healing is a journey we take together. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired. This is Amanda, wishing you bright blessings.